Hello, folks. This is I'm Sean Gio again. And for those of you who haven't seen me already in a conference, I'm the policy director here at the Partnership for Strong Communities, and we're at our last breakout session for this year's conference, and we're ending with some really amazing practitioners for you to learn a lot. Some of my favorite people working in housing in the state. So I'm really glad that I get to kick it off. Again, just want to remind you that if you want, please, feel free to talk about us on social media, say nice things. You can use hashtag CAHC 2023 if you would like. So our last session is affordable housing preservation and community stability. Before I pass it on to Marcus Smith, with just a few items I'd like to go over. And the first is I want to thank our leading sponsor, Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, who critical to making this conference happen, as are all of our sponsors this year. Our visionary sponsors are Connecticut Department of Housing and Wells Fargo, Bank of America, D'Amelia Associates, M&T Bank, and Webster Bank, I almost forgot, Melville Charitable Trust, and the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, Cohn Resnick, and Trinity Financial. And for this session, we also have POA and Wind Companies. So just quick housekeeping: session's being recorded. Please keep your microphone muted. If you have any technical issues, you can use the chat function, and you can ask me, Sean Gio, directly, and hopefully I will be able to help out, or Don Branson, who's also on this call, more likely will be able to help out. And please, if you want to leave a comment, back in the lobby, you'll see the megaphone symbol at the upper right-hand corner. You can click on that and leave chat comments. So now I'd like to pass it on to Mark Smith from the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority.
Great, thanks, Sean. I appreciate the handoff. So just to kind of bring everybody, make sure we're all in the right room. This is the Affordable Housing Preservation and Community Stability session. I'd like to start by welcoming everybody. My name is Marcus Smith, the Director of Research, Marketing, and Outreach with the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, and I'll be serving as the moderator for the conversation. Over the next hour, we're hoping to discuss the main topic at hand through the lens of three different but complementary organizations, all of whom are doing really amazing work in Connecticut's communities. We're hoping that you'll leave the session with a better appreciation for the different approaches our panelists bring to preserving and expanding affordability in ways that benefit both the families and folks who live in the housing, as well as the communities in general. And in light of yesterday's excellent keynote from Majora Carter, I hope you were all able to listen in. I'm also hoping that we can dig a little deeper on certain themes that she brought up, but more on that in a bit. So first, let's meet the panelists. Full bios can be found somewhere, like in the app or somewhere else. I know they exist. I think they are somewhere in the Zoom app. So we're not going to go into the whole reading the bio thing. But just real quick, we have Diane Smith, the CEO for Capital for Change. We have Kevin Taylor, Executive Director of Nest, and Daryl Brooks, Chief of Operations with Beulah Land Development Corporation. So we don't have slides. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we don't have any slides, and it really, for the sake of hoping to keep the conversation focused on the folks involved. But if we were to have some slides, maybe one or two slides, to help set the stage, I think the impulse might be to highlight things like Connecticut's rapidly aging housing stock, right? So we have some of the oldest housing stock in the country, and it's exponentially older and unhealthier in our cities. We might also talk about how Connecticut has one of the largest racial wealth gaps in the country, and also and has the largest gap between white and black home ownership. And I guess if we were accountants, we kind of would probably put all that stuff in like a liabilities column. But what I really appreciate, and I'm really grateful for the folks, the panelists that we have joining us today, with Diane, Daryl, and Kevin, is I think they go through their work focusing not necessarily on those things, although they're present and relevant. But I think what they bring is a focus on like what might be considered assets, right? What are the strengths of a community that we want to amplify and lift up and focus on and improve and make even stronger, and make them in these special places to live and help make them into places that people can thrive. So as far as questions go, housekeeping in general, if you have a question, drop it in the chat. We'll try to get to it as we're going along. If it seems like it's going to be nicely fit in. Otherwise, we'll definitely save room at the end to kind of work through some of the questions that you might have. So I'll start with you, Diane, right on the spot. Can you briefly talk about Capital for Change, your overall mission, and some of the specific programs, products, services that C4C offers that are somewhat relevant to the topic at hand?
Thank you, Marcus. So Capital for Change is a community development finance institution, which means that we are an unregulated bank. We do lending in low and moderate income communities to serve low and moderate income households and families. We are certified by the Department of Treasury. So Capital for Change has actually been in existence since 2016, but it was a result of merging 3 other CDFIs back in 2016. So the oldest of the predecessor agencies have begun in the late 1960s. So we've been around for a very long time. Our mission really is to have creative, flexible financing to serve the populations and the spaces that we serve in the areas of in any area of community development, which includes business development, housing development, and other revitalization activities. In terms of lending products, our lending products are fairly vanilla in terms of what they do. So we can provide pre-development lending, construction lending, permanent lending, acquisition. We do small business lending, so working capital for-profit businesses, but they're generally small businesses. But we can also provide working capital to nonprofits who are looking to expand their programming or to purchase a building or equipment. So we're fairly flexible in the types of lending we can do with some fairly standard vanilla products. I would say that where we have found our sweet spot has been in sort of the smaller housing development. So you're looking at housing, at apartment buildings that are less than 20 units. They're not normally in the LIHTC space. And working with investor owners and repairing those properties as naturally occurring affordable or sometimes Section 8 types of experiences. The other piece that I don't think that we're going to spend a lot of time on, but I don't want to miss it. We are a lender we provide energy efficiency loans to homeowners to improve the energy efficiency of their homes as well. And we do have some energy efficiency products for the multifamily space, but really our biggest engine on energy efficiency is on the homeowner side. And I will stop there.
Thank you. I do have some little breadcrumbs there, but I think we'll come back to them. So Kevin, I want to bring you in. For those who are not all that familiar with Nest and all the things that you do, I mean, a lot of folks probably know you as your previous name, NHS of Waterbury, but maybe give us a flavor of what Nest is up to and how your organization works.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Marcus. Once again, Kevin Taylor, Executive Director of Nest, which was formerly Neighborhood Housing Services of Waterbury, and we made a change just this past summer. But we're a community development corporation based here in the city of Waterbury, which we're focused on affordable housing development. Or just affordable housing. And we do that through a couple of things. One is development, where we focus on primarily home ownership, but we also do understand the need for a quality rental. So we do provide rental housing. It's just not our main goal. And then we also have our education and counseling, where we provide first-time home buyer education and counseling, foreclosure prevention, landlord education, and financial education. And then we also have our community building and engagement, which is basically focused on, as we're doing our revitalization in a particular neighborhood from a brick and mortar standpoint, we also want to invest in the residents. in the community, in the neighborhood as well. And so, addressing quality of life issues, working closely with the residents to improve the neighborhood and in the ways that they see necessary and needed. And then starting in January of 2024, we'll get into lending just as well. So with the goal of eventually becoming a CDFI in a year or two.
Well, that's great. I actually didn't know that. So congratulations and good luck on that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So Daryl, I mean, we've heard from an existing CDFI and an aspirational CDFI and two organizations who are doing a lot of great work across the state. Beulah Land is something different, though. I feel like you're doing something similar, but in the same space, but somewhat different. Maybe talk about your organization and what your origin story is and how you're serving your community's housing needs. Oh, you're on mute, Daryl.
I was keeping those house rules. Thank you, Marcus. Appreciate the introduction. Again, my name is Daryl Brooks, and Executive Director for Land Development Corporation. Beulah Land Development Corporation is a unique nonprofit. Beulah Land was established in 1994. It originated out of Beulah Heights First Pentecostal Church. Therefore, Beulah Land is a faith-based nonprofit. And it's a faith-based because really faith drives our mission. If you allow me just for a few moments, the church just recently celebrated its 100 years of existence in Dixville and had an opportunity to really engage in community development some years ago. And what really started this was about affecting and changing the lives of individuals in our community. And so a horrific crime took place in a building that we were able to acquire and make it an elderly building, but a horrific crime, which was the reason why we got into community development. 18-month-old baby, life was taken by a senseless act of violence by a drug dealer who wanted to send a message to an individual. And as a result of that, under our former executive director, the vision was about bringing home ownership opportunities back to Dixville, in particular on Orchard Street. And so we've been in existence since 1994, and the mission is really to impact poverty, eliminate poverty, provide home ownership opportunities for individuals and families, and to sustain community growth and build stakeholders and partners. And so the project that you see behind me is one of its first of its kind on the East Coast using mass timber. It is a 69 unit a project, a LIHTC deal that we're doing in partnership with a number of partners. I'm excited about it because it's mass timber that is being used for deeply affordable home rental units. And so Beulah Land has been engaged in home ownership opportunities and has just recently started getting into affordable rental, because I think both complement the sustainability in our communities. I would say this, Beulah Land has its mission about providing opportunities. I think, not sure you mentioned it, but it's an opportunity to provide wealth for individuals and families. And so we're excited and really don't often celebrate this story as much as we should, but we should really as often as we get a chance to do so. And our first project is deeply affordable. 90 to 98% of the home buyers were single mothers of 2 or 3, and are at 60% of them immediately obtained wealth at their closing. And when the foreclosure crisis came and hit, we had a 0 default rate on the original loan. So we're excited about that story, and it's a real true testament about building wealth for low-income families. So I'll end there. Thank you again for the opportunity.
No, well said, and I think that's terrific, and it's funny because I'll come back to it, but I hear home ownership in all three of your comments. I know Diane, you said, "Oh, we're not sure if we'll get to it," but then, like almost on cue, both Kevin and Daryl are talking about it. So I think we'll come back to it, but I don't want to lose that thread. So picking up on a couple of threads that I heard from Majora Carter's talk yesterday. One of them, it's actually the subtitle of her book, right? It's you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. And Kevin, going back to your bio, I see something similar in your bio that says that your work is kind of around turning neighborhoods of circumstance into neighborhoods of choice. So Kevin, from your perspective, can you talk a little bit about that? I think what either through the lens of Nest or maybe even through your own personal philosophies, what does that mean? And how does it translate into the work that you're doing around, preserving affordability, but also creating this neighborhood of choice and this neighborhood that you don't necessarily have to move away from?
Yeah, so I'm gonna tell a little story because a lot of my reasoning has a story behind it, or it's based on my experience. But so I was born and raised in Waterbury. I live in the same house that I grew up in, and when I got married, my wife and I just house sat, and after about 5 years, I realized I just can't keep doing this to my parents. So either let's find another place to live so they can do whatever they choose or want to do with the house, or we buy it. So we started looking around, and my wife, she's an educator, and so first thing for her was school system. So Waterbury wasn't it when it came to school system. But I mean, now we're looking at the suburbs. But as we started to do that, we kind of put a list together of what were the pros and the cons of moving out of Waterbury, especially since we both lived and worked, we worked in Waterbury. And so some of those, the pros, of course, was education, property value, things along those lines, low crime rates, whatever the case may be. But then we started to look at what the cons were and came about that, well, our kids will probably be a handful of Black kids in the whole entire school. What does that mean for my daughter as far as, her as a Black young lady, and how would that impact her, and how she views herself, and so forth and so on. Just community in general. We would have found ourselves being back in Waterbury for pretty much every single thing possible, even with grocery shopping, because certain ethnic foods will not be sold in the suburban communities in the supermarket. So we'll find ourselves going back to Waterbury just to do the basics. Church is a whole nother thing. We'll be going Sunday for church back in Waterbury, or even for Bible study, or whatever the case may be. And so, that kind of just got me thinking about, I think our premise in some sort of way in the beginning of thinking about moving out of Waterbury, because if we wanted something better for ourselves, we had to move out to where white people were. And so that is that whole sort of mindset that in order for you to do better, and it's affordable housing, sort of when we think about it, and even like with the funding sources, they say, well, we want to create more opportunities in the suburbs, and we want, so you get more points if you go out here, or towards your application, if you're looking in suburban areas, or if you're looking at a transit-oriented development sort of area, you get more points for that. But if you're looking in the urban areas that are predominantly Black and brown, well, we're not going to give you as many points, And so basically that what they're basically saying, just the same. If you want a better life, you have to move out into the white communities, and I'm just not here for that to say that white is right. Just the way the suburbs were developed with federal dollars, and people got basic subsidies to live in these various suburbs. I'm saying the same thing needs to be done for these Black and brown communities, and that's why our focus is solely in revitalizing these Black and brown communities. It doesn't, just because it's predominantly Black and Latino doesn't mean that the communities are bad. What has happened is that mindset to move out. And so what you're left with at the end of the day is a neighborhood that is flooded by mainly poverty and low income folks. And so back in the day, Harlem Renaissance days and prior to that, and after that, Black communities were thriving. There was a lot of wealth. You had a mix of incomes and a mix of professionals and businesses that were Black owned and so forth. And so I'm just trying to get back to that, that's what I mean by communities of choice, that if you are Black, Latino, or even white and wanna live I'll just say in the Crownbrook neighborhood or Waterbury, that neighborhood is no different than the Bunker Hill neighborhood or the country club neighborhood. They're all the same, regardless of what the skin color is or the makeup of the neighborhood as far as race is concerned. So that's kind of what I mean when we state that we want to. It's not about communities and circumstances, but communities of choice. Hope I answered your question, Marcus.
No, that's brilliant. Anybody, Daryl, you came off mute. You have something to add?
Yeah, our mission is about building affordable housing, and creating communities of choice. And I think Kevin said it best. And I think oftentimes what happens, particularly in urban communities, there's a tremendous amount of disinvestment. And as a result of that disinvestment, blight shows up on a regular, crime is on a regular. And that's one of the reasons why the Development Corp was formed, because when the church was originally built on its site, which is on Orchard Street, it was anchored by homeowners. There were large duplex and tenement buildings, but the homeowner lived in the building. And so there was an invested stakeholder, if you will, in the upbringing or the well-being of the community. As a result of disinvestment, as a result of people moving out, disrepair came and blight, et cetera, and so as a result, people think that low-income people or poor people don't want to live in a safe and revitalized community, and that's the furthest thing from the choice. And so our mission is really to create opportunities for those individuals and those families to be able to stay in a community that they were raised in. Dixwell is the African American community for New Haven. The Underground Railroad came through Dixwell, and so as a result, generations of families came to Dixwell, New Haven in particular, and in Dixwell, made their home in Dixwell. And we have generations, but unfortunately, what's happening now in Dixwell is that a number of people being displaced and not being able to live in the community that they were raised in, or that their grandparents were raised in. The average median income in Dixwell is 50% of the AMI for New Haven proper. But what's interesting, what's happening, and this is another conversation that comes up, and that is, displacement, gentrification. And so people quite naturally can't afford to stay here. Rent is extremely high. The homeowners who are existing homeowners, because of all the development that's happening around them, prices or the values going up, therefore taxes are going up, and their homes are already falling in disrepair because of lack of resources to just do simple maintenance. And so, I think creating communities of choice, to what Kevin said, is having organizations like ourselves who are committed to revitalization and creating communities of choice by creating affordable home ownership and or affordable rental for families to be able to live and remain in a community that they've called home, not for 4 or 5 years, but for decades.
Yeah, it's one of the other things that popped out in yesterday's opening keynote was this. It was just 4 words on a slide, and it's been stuck with me since I saw it. And I think it's relevant to this conversation only because of the word preservation is there. Are we preserving poverty? To what extent is the work that we're doing inadvertently, perhaps, preserving and locking in poverty in these communities? But I hear Daryl, in your situation, right, and it maybe somewhat unique to New Haven or other parts of the state, but not everywhere, where you are seeing displacement, right? It's not necessarily locking in or it's preserving. It's also pushing back on those externalities there. But I'm interested in maybe Diane or Kevin, your thoughts on that concept of preserving poverty. And I say that not in an agreement, but Diane, what do you think?
So it's interesting. I have two reactions to that. You're not preserving poverty in that housing does not generate income, right? So the income question and the housing question are conflated frequently. So, we are creating housing opportunity for people who have limited money, but we're not relegating them to being poor, right? Like, so they are not, so I think that we should be clear about that. Having said that, I'm not a project manager, and the only two projects that I've managed, I changed. One of them was in the south end of Hartford, where a developer had a tax credit deal. They were doing, 60 units of affordable housing. It was deeply income targeted, and it was going to be affordable for 99 years to the poorest members of the community. And I told them no, they couldn't do that deal. And things ensued that led me on the other side of a table with a senator who said, I don't know why you said no. And it's because you're dedicating this space to the very poorest people for 5 generations, because it was restricted to the poorest individuals, so that when there was turnover, it would always be replaced by the poorest folks. So I have sort of separate experiences with how I think about what you've just described, because I don't think we pay enough attention to the income side of affordable housing and why we're in this industry, what is sort of driving us. And over the last few years, particularly sort of post-pandemic, as costs have escalated, there's a lot of things that went on. There wasn't any way to fill the gaps to meet the needs of the market that we were trying to serve. And at no point did we come at it from the other side. It's like, okay, how do we also get people to be able to afford, like to have more money? So I'm torn about that question, because I don't think we are preserving poverty, although we may be creating spaces where that could be impervious to economic improvement, because we have drawn this box around who can be there in terms of their income. And so I'm a little on the fence about how to think about those approaches.
Yeah, so I think let's stay with you, Diane, on terms of maybe with a solutions-oriented mindset to some degree. You and I both work for financing entities, right? So we're lenders in a sense. And there's a school of thought in that space a lot of times where we can only do so much, right? We in terms of impact, in terms of focus, because it's who comes to us with the project, and that's really all we can do. Is fund the project that's in front of us. For those of us who are here in this room that work with lenders or work for financing agencies or investment agencies, what might be some creative ways to maybe counteract some of these forces? And I mean that to say, allow for that growth within a community over time, or allow for owner occupancy, that sort of thing. So just what do you think?
I think, I don't know if it's particularly creative, but it is about partners, right? And it's about knowing where you are. You're not going to do the same thing in, I don't know, Barkhamsted that you would in Bridgeport. So you kind of have to really know where you are, and really understand who your ambassadors are, because there are a number of things around affordable housing, particularly when you're in the LIHTC space. And I served as a developer for a very short period of time and learned an awful lot. So Daryl, thank you. It takes a long time. And there's so many hurdles and so many meetings and so many details that you don't get those instant results. And by the time as a lender, a developer has come to you, they have baked a deal, right? So we are as lenders reacting to what we get, but it's not as though they said, you know, we got together with a group of people on Sunday, can you give us $10 million on Tuesday, right? So it's a long process. So we shouldn't ignore the things we're responding to when they're coming to us. Therefore, as lenders, I think we need to be more on the ground or have some more opportunity to understand what is happening while the developers are putting their deals together so that we can respond with the right types of money. And what I have experienced over the course of my career is that developments need money to behave in different ways. You know, it'd be great if you had free money all the time. That would be great. But that's not the way it's going to happen. So it's, you know, how elastic does that money have to be? How creative can we be around those rates and terms over a period of time and be really intentional on what that investment actually creates as an opportunity for the community? And I don't think as lenders, we spend enough time really understanding what is happening in that marketplace so we can design the products in a way that responds to that need.
So I think that brings up another question that we were kicking around as a group, and this may be for Kevin and Daryl because you both work in specific communities. You know, this phrase, you know, nothing about us without us, seems very relevant these days as communities are kind of mobilizing to kind of push back on forces that are coming in to do more extractive wealth, you know, taking wealth out of communities through development processes. How might folks who are in the development space and even lenders, I mean, to Diane's point, maybe there's an opportunities for folks who are kind of on the other side of the table to be more engaged in the earlier stages. How might we be more inclusive in the ways that we work with communities so that their voices are included in these processes?
Who did you just ask
So-
that question to?
Oh,
okay.
sorry, Kevin, Daryl, Diane, if you got some thoughts too. Really, it's kind of I just kind of put it out there.
Well, I'll jump in first. I'll toss to Kevin. I think it's important, extremely important to constantly stay grounded with the community, meeting with the community and having conversations with the community. There's often times that private investors come in. I'll share with you just a quick story. Went to a community meeting, and there was a presentation about a market rate deal that was coming in into the community, and oftentimes this property has been vacant and blighted for my entire lifetime, and so all of a sudden there is this desire to invest, but private dollars. And the only reason why they came into the community to have the conversations because they were kind of forced to do so because it was right in the neighborhood. But an individual from the community asked the question, "Why here? Why now?" And the investor couldn't answer the question. They tried to allay the concerns of the community to some degree, but they really couldn't answer the question. And so I think it's incumbent upon not only nonprofits and lenders, but also community leaders, but political leaders in particular, to ensure that these kind of conversations happen in particular urban communities that have been disinvested. Kevin said this earlier. There, you know, at one point, you know, I don't want to get in trouble, but the state was giving points and higher points for, you know, doing work in the suburbs. And the truth of the matter is, you know, everybody's not going to own a car. everybody doesn't want to own a car. And there are benefits of why, to living in the city, of why now all of a sudden Haven's going back to a tremendous amount of density and this trans-oriented development that's really working, because folks like to ride their bikes, they like to walk, and they rather catch public transportation. But I think having a real dynamic conversation with politicians, with policymakers, with banks, so forth and so on, is extremely important to include people in the development prior to coming in and getting the land and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. But, hey, folks, what would you like to see in your community? What would you like to see? And then the other piece is, they need to be a part of that revitalization. They've lived for a number of years in the disrepair and the disinvestment. And now all of a sudden, you have hundreds of $millions coming in, and you have to be displaced, and you can't take advantage of the revitalization or to get some kind of benefit out of that. To me, it's disingenuous, and that's another conversation that you're probably not prepared to have. Sorry for throwing that out there, Kevin.
I echo everything that Daryl stated. And I think the only thing I would add was that, the work that we do, it has to be guided by the community, because although I know that neighborhood very well, I mean, my grandmother used to live in this, particular neighborhood that we are focusing our efforts in. So I've seen the neighborhood, I've seen the neighborhood change over years. But at the end of the day, I don't live there on the day-to-day basis. I'm not there from, at nighttime and really fully understanding or knowing the issues that neighborhood is dealing with. Nor do I know, being an architect, I have these visions and thoughts of what things should be, but doesn't mean that what my visions and thoughts are necessarily what the community wants or what's best for that particular community. So working with the neighborhood groups and getting to know the people in the community is very important, and making sure that from day one they're part of the discussion as to what they want their neighborhood to be, and we're just there as a tool to help them get to that point and to be their partner. At the end of the day, to get to where it needs to be or where they would like to see it. And as Daryl stated, they have every right to be a part of what this change is going to be, and also stay there once this change happens. Now, I know that once you start to improve a neighborhood in a certain way, you're going to get that private investment, and trying to thwart off gentrification is always a challenge. But once again, making sure the community is involved from the beginning, and making sure everything that you're doing is what they want and not necessarily what you think is best for them.
And I think I would add to that, when I was reading through some of the questions, Marcus, that you had prepared, and we talk about, the needs of underserved communities was part of the question. And I think, again, this is where sort of language matters, because we get into the habit of saying things, and are these communities underserved, or are they badly served, right? Are they treated with disregard, so that things happen to a community rather than with a community? So really, where your question started, how do we make sure that the neighborhoods and the neighbors are treated with respect and they are heard? I think the NRZ process, when it was established, 100 years ago, that was part of the intention, is to have the neighbors have say in what they wanted, and to design plans that really help them to stabilize their neighborhood and have the types of features and amenities in the neighborhoods they really wanted. It never really bloomed the way I think it was intended to. But it's also, I think when I see disregard, I told you I've only managed 2 projects, and I managed to kill them both. There was another project in Hartford that was in the South End, and the developer was going to come in and put in effectively a halfway house in a neighborhood that's saturated with with shelters and halfway houses and service-based housing. So I was concerned, and I said to the developer, okay, we're going to go to the NRZ at the time, and you're going to tell them exactly what you're doing. I don't think you've told them the whole story. If they're good, then I'm good. And the neighbor's like, no, we've done enough. We've done enough. We're taking care of the people who are here. We're happy to have them, but we don't need more of that because we want a change in how our neighborhood is structured, and what our growth opportunities are right here. And to I think it was Daryl's original point. They didn't want to leave. They weren't hating their neighbors and all of this other housing. They just didn't think having more of it was to their benefit. And the disregard from the developer's point of view that he could just do this because it was there, right? And that's where this is where this goes, right? This is the neighborhood where this activity goes, this type of housing goes, was really callous. And we really need to resist that temptation, just to make decisions on behalf of other people.
Thanks for that. Now, I've got a question coming in through the chat, and it seems very on point, so we'll bring it out now. So can you speak to NIMBYism? Like, what are the effects? And I think when we think of NIMBYism, it's typically within the context of like suburban development, right? But I think it sounds like, hearing from the three of you, it's alive and well in the communities that we're serving. So how does that factor in, to the work that you're doing? Maybe Dixwell, it might be a great example because, Daryl, you had to bring that project through some sort of local approval process, and I imagine it wasn't all green lights for you. So any stories in terms of like what that NIMBYism opposition might have, how that came to play with you?
I'm probably not the best person to answer this question because we actually had all green lights because, the folks in the community understand the work that we do, right? And so we've provided homeownership opportunities, and have recently providing opportunities for affordable rentals, and being deeply affordable, to the point where 20 of the units that we're providing behind me, that you see in the photo behind me, are for folks who are at risk for homelessness. So, again, faith drives our mission. We're not into the service, providing, units for 811, so to speak, for those that have, mental health or any of those kind of things. I think some of the challenges that folks have is when you provide services for those that are struggling with substance abuse and other issues. When you have a crime-ridden neighborhood and you have a neighborhood that has been overrun by drug activity, and et cetera, adding those kind of services. I think in New Haven, in Dixwell and Newhall, there was a proposal to put up a facility. And so that was problematic for the community because, they rather not see those kind of additional services continuously coming into the community. Again, I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer this, but, for our housing project and homeownership and rental, we haven't had that problem. Not in my backyard, but I do I do understand why some people have a challenge to, an over saturation of services coming into a community, when it should be really spread. Let's spread the wealth. So
yeah, I don't have that problem either, and I think the reason why is because I only deal with people who want us to be there, with communities that want us to be there. We don't have the capacity, we don't have the finances to deal with ongoing legal battles and revisions of drawing after drawing after drawing and review and so forth and so on. So we have to be prudent with our resources. And it doesn't make sense for us to go into a community that does not want us there as far as what we're trying to do as far as affordable housing. Now, what I would say along the lines of NIMBYism, the 8-30G just needs to be enforced by the state. You know, if you have this statute that is out there and it's requiring towns to provide their share, you know, basically share the requirement for affordable housing at 10%, then if an agency like Nest or Beulah or NHS of New Haven or whoever else decides to go into Southbury or Greenwich or wherever the case may be and say, you know, you guys are in need of affordable housing because you only have 1% or whatever the case may be. And we have this law here that states that we can come in here and provide you with affordable housing as long as we meet the zoning requirements and everything along those lines, which it always does, but the, you know, other stuff will come up like infrastructure or something, or the noise, or we don't, you know, our schools are going to be saturated or you know, it's going to affect our budget and so forth. It's things that have nothing to do with your particular project in general. It's all made up stuff. So, you know, if that became more forceful as what it should, then you know, then NIMBYism, I mean, people will still be opposed to it, I guess, to some extent, but then I myself, as the executive director of Nest, would actually look into other opportunities outside of urban areas. But at the end of the day, I once again, I just go back to my previous statement as to why we kind of focus on Black and Brown communities, because you know, in Darrell stated, they have not seen any type of investment for years. They've been neglected. And it's time that we put the effort and the dollars back into these communities that have not been put in for over these, you know, for many and many of years, and invest in the people, because they deserve quality neighborhoods just as well.
I will agree with you, Kevin. Sorry, Diana, if I jumped in and you want to. I agree with Kevin wholeheartedly, and I think, you know, I think there is a battle to be fought for communities that are refusing affordable housing, particularly in the surrounding counties of urban centers, Hartford, New Haven. But, you know, that may not be our fight or our mission as it relates to what we do where we are in Waterbury, New Haven, and so forth and so on, because, you know, there is a tremendous amount of disinvestment in our urban centers. You can see the line of demarcation for poverty and well-to-do. And so, you know, you drive a certain place in New Haven and the landscape changes. You know, you turn around, make, you know, just a quick U-turn, and within, you know, sometimes 45 seconds to 30 minutes to 30 seconds to a minute, you're in a, you know, high poverty, high crime stricken, you know, community. And there's a tremendous of a lack of investment in urban centers. And so so it's not about, and there are some families that may want to leave for better school system or just, you know, bigger lawns or whatever the case may be. But I do think there ought to be a conversation. And I think there are a number of folks on that front who are trying to push that envelope about, you know, expanding and going into communities where they're saying, not in my backyard kind of thing. But you know, for me, that's not my mission at this present time.
And what that says to me, from what Kevin is saying and what Darrell is saying, is that there hasn't been. So I've worked for the state for most of my career, so I will always come at it from that sort of perspective. There has never been a comprehensive urban policy at the state level that does provide an investment strategy for the cities to have that, both the economic opportunity and the stability, so that there are not only these are communities of choice, but they are communities that are grown from the people who already live there, right? So now everything is fairly binary. You live in the city and you suffer what you suffer. You don't have good schools and whatever, but you're able to stay near your grocery stores and your church and all that. So that's what you get. Or you leave to be in a place where you may not be welcome, where it is not familiar to you, where you have to go home to get the amenities you're accustomed to in order to have a lawn and a park. And it's sort of the Promethean choice, right? And I think it's a false choice, but I think it's not only is it a false choice, it's a false choice because at the policy level, no one has ever stood right in there and said, this is what we're going to be doing in terms of our urban strategy. This is how we're going to invest in our cities. This is how we're going to bring jobs to these communities in a really intentional and persistent way, right? That hasn't happened. I was in government for 3 decades, and there are pieces of it along the way, but they tend to be more political than policy, and it didn't really grow the cities in the way that I think it could have.
Yeah, I just want to add this real quick because I think about Waterbury and their strategy when it comes to revitalizing the city. And the effort has always been focused in the downtown area. And, all the dollars, all the energy has been focused and to some of brownfields just as well, but downtown. And it's not is in the plan is not to revitalize and build up the downtown for the folks who live in Waterbury. It's all about how are we going to get the people from the surrounding suburbs to come into Waterbury and feel comfortable and spend their money, so forth and so on. So, just another example of the various surrounding neighborhoods of the downtown are just, being neglected, not even being thought about. They're the taxpayers, but the dollars that they pay, that they give to the city is not being put back to benefit them in any sort of way.
I want to lift up a question that we got, and I think it brings us back to where we started, right? That we talked about, we could lament the negative, the data and this and that, but I think what we've appreciated in this conversation is bringing us back to the positive. So the question is, do you see any direct impacts or change for the better as a result of all the investments happening in Black and Brown communities? Can you highlight some more positive impacts, and what else needs to happen for more of this to happen, to come to fruition?
If I can jump in on that one, I think, thank you for the question, because I think it's really important. And as I started this conversation out, we probably have not highlighted our successful stories like we should have. Again, having an organization formed out of the church, you kind of keep your head down and you keep grinding. And it's really not about grandstanding or waving a banner and saying, hey, look what we created, right? But I do think there's something significant about, and for those that go to church, particularly in the African-American experience, we had what we call testimony, right? And so somebody's got to stand up and testify. And so we've had some successful stories for families and individuals. I had one lady in particular who lost her job for a significant amount of time and came real close to losing her home. But because the home was so affordable, our very first project that she was able to buy from us, Orchard Street Townhomes, because it was so affordable, she was able to weather that storm and then be able to find a new job and then catch up on her mortgage. The other thing is individuals who were used to paying $800 to $900 rent, now we're paying $500 for a mortgage. And in doing so, They walked into a home where they had almost $80,000 in equity. So we created this sense of wealth for these individuals and families. We reduced their overall monthly expenses. And so, yeah, and it's really creating those kind of opportunities of investment in urban centers, because everybody, I don't care who you are, Black, white, rich or poor, everybody wants to live in a quality, safe, affordable house that they can raise their children in. They can feel comfortable with sitting either on the front porch or playing in the backyard and not worry about gunplay or any of those kinds of things. And so I think having the opportunity to create these kinds of win-wins are necessary for individuals to jump in and say, hey, let's make this investment, even in places where folks don't see the value of making the investment out in there.
I would say the positive, I don't know if we've seen all the positive impacts. I mean, clearly, Mr. Brooks has been at this for a very long time, and he has the benefit of seeing the fruit of his labor. I would say, though, we shouldn't get tired, right? So, during the pandemic, it revealed a lot of things that other people had seen for a very long time and other folks that got to see for the first time. And there was all of this emotion around change and changing hearts and doing things differently. And, people made promises and commitments, and then they forgot, or they got tired, or they realized that this is really hard work. Development is really, really hard work, and doing development in spaces that have not been given sort of rain for such a long time, it is really hard. Things just don't bloom right away, and you can't get tired. So if this is something we intend to do, we must continue to do it, and we must be persistent in it. And you just can't give up because you're not seeing the fruit of it immediately. You really have to kind of have the long view on this work. And you also have a destination and an intention around what you want to see happen in the end. It can't be incidental. It's got to be purposeful. And, that's why it brings me back to policy. I really would like to see stronger policy around urban development and urban revitalization than we have seen over a number of years. That is really committed not only with the policy, but with the dollars and with the help. You need to have more laborers in the field.
And I know time is of the essence, so I'm just going to share this one quick highlight. Dealing with a family, Maria Rivera, who is our housing counselor director at Ness, was dealing with a family for 3 years. They wanted to buy a home, and she met with them, had to work with them for 3 years to get them in the position now to only be able to buy a home, but to be able to maintain that home. And eventually that goal was met. They purchased their home, an affordable home. And on top of that, their finances were better because they worked with Maria to manage their money better. And now at this particular point in time in their life, they bought an investment property now. And so talk about building wealth. That is just generational wealth. That is one example from our organization, working with the Bonas to see where they started and to where they are now. And long story short, that's just what we're trying to do is get people in affordable housing, home ownership situations, and then just build from there. So.
Well, I think we're about time right now, but I think we could just keep going and going, honestly. But I appreciate Diane and Kevin and Daryl, you taking the time to have this conversation. I hope that folks come away with something that they can bring back to their work and improve things in their own way. Again, thank you to the partnership for this opportunity to bring this conversation forward, and best of luck for everybody.
Thank
Thank you all.
Thank you.